Hi, everybody. It's Sharyl Attkisson. Welcome to another edition of Full Measure After Hours. Today, Donkey Kong. Democrats are scrambling for a direction and leader. For the midterms and beyond, Democrats are scrambling to find the identity and leader that are most likely to win them control of Congress and the next seat in the Oval Office. Eliminating Democrat Eric Swalwell from the California governor's race over a sex scandal seems to have been effective in consolidating Democrat votes there to ensure at least one Democrat gets enough support in the upcoming primary to make it to the general election. When Swalwell was in the race, the top vote getters were Republicans, and the way it works in California, only the top two advanced to the general election. That would have meant there was no chance for a Democrat to win. That was a big deal. Well, all of a sudden, up bubbles a sex scandal with years-old allegations against Eric Swalwell, but it conveniently works, as I said, to consolidate Democrat votes and change that dynamic in California. On Sunday, May 17th, I'll be talking about the Democrats' search for a real leader that can take them beyond the Trump era. And I'll also be talking about the Democrats' hard turn to the left in many cases, even embracing socialism and communism. In today's podcast, you will hear some thoughts from both Democrats and Republicans as we count down to the midterms that will decide which party controls Congress and largely the Washington agenda. First, Democrat Seth Magaziner of Rhode Island.
What do you see as happening in terms of the direction and how that could impact or pull at the Democrat Party as a whole group that can have impact?
I think what you're seeing in the Democratic Party now is a real turnover in leadership, right? Speaker Pelosi, who was the leader for Democrats in the House for 2 decades, is stepping back. We have a new leadership team with Hakeem Jeffries and Catherine Clark. You have newer faces emerging in the Democratic Party, both in the more moderate camp and in the more progressive camp. And that's a healthy thing. I think it is a healthy thing to have some generational turnover and some new faces and new ideas emerge. There will always be a moderate and a progressive wing of the Democratic Party, just like there will always be, a more moderate and more far-right wing of the Republican Party. But having some turnover and some change in leadership is a healthy thing. And you're seeing that happen in the Democratic Party now. It can be messy and it can be contentious at times, but ultimately it's a good thing.
If the answer to this is no worries, I see what I think are a little bit of parallels between the establishment Republicans that were just the population, which was weary of establishment Republicans and establishment politics and went for Trump.
Yeah.
And then I think there are Democrats who are weary of the establishment Democrats, but they're not going to go for Trump. And maybe some of those are seeking the socialist and the far left.
I think they're seeking new faces. For sure. And by the way, Trump, even though he's someone who I disagree with on almost everything, there are certain issues where, he moderated himself compared to the prior establishment Republicans, right?
Right. He is not far right on a lot of stuff. In fact, he's more like a Democrat on some issues.
Oh, right. He's far right, too far right for me on a lot of things. And particularly on rule of law issues, which concern me deeply. But he doesn't talk about cutting Social Security the way, even Mitt Romney or Paul Ryan did, right? And so similarly, on the Democratic side, I think you will see new leaders emerge, and they already are emerging. And again, it's not about moving to the left or to the center. It's about new faces, it's about new voices, and it's about having the courage to break from the orthodoxy. But crucially to our conversation, you have to be willing to call out the corruption in Washington, because the American people know it's there. And it's not just in Congress, right? What I say is I am against corruption, whether it is stock trading in Congress, cryptocurrency being sold out of the Oval Office, or Supreme Court justices taking gifts from people who have business before the court. All of it is wrong, and we need to address all of it. And what I think the American people are hungering for is political figures of both parties who are willing to call out their own parties when it comes to issues of corruption.
Next up, Republican Congressman Chip Roy of Texas.
It's almost like this far left socialist communist radical element is a mirror image of the populist movement for Trump, in that I feel like there are a lot of Democrats who are discouraged with their establishment. And to the extent that they're not moderate, they're not going to go toward Trump or the Republican side, but they're looking for something, kind of like Bernie Sanders was. And he was very popular, as you know, when he was running the last couple terms, and the party really didn't want him to be as popular as he was and engineered against him in the primaries. Do you just have any overarching thoughts about the future of the Democrat Party, what we're going to see, what's behind it?
I certainly think that we've seen some fairly extreme left candidates popping into the front of the Democrat Party. We saw it obviously in New York with Mamdani. We saw it in the recent congressional election, even in Nashville, Tennessee. There was no real gray area about whether either of those candidates are coming from. I think we've seen some of it coming out of, and this gets into some of the Islamification issue, and looking in Dearborn and looking in Minnesota. And there's a clear move in that radical direction. And I get what you're trying to say, to draw parallels. I don't totally accept the parallels there. I think at the core of the populist / conservative resistance to the swamp is a reflection of the mass of the people. That's why it's kind of more populist, who just want their country back. I think the radical left has an agenda to take America in a different direction. I think the agenda of the populist right, if you will, for the most part, is to try to return government, to the people in a more populist way, for better and worse, right? I mean, there are pros and cons to a populist movement. But I do think it's a different motivation. And I think that's a fair characterization. And I think we should recognize that characterization, that if you've got a strong Islamification wing, well, there's a motivation to that. If you got a strong socialist wing, well, we're not a socialist country. We've got a massive social welfare state. We've got a big government, but we're not a socialist country. We certainly don't advocate socialism. Whereas what you're hearing out of President Trump, out of the populist right, Freedom Caucus conservatives, whatever you want to say, is, hey, we want to get to the core of our limited government constitution, a sovereign nation, who we are as Americans, and protect this country. So I do think there's different motivations there. But I do think they're certainly moving to a hard left position in their core leadership. And that if you're kind of going through the story and you're thinking through it from the context of frustrations with the swamp, I might accept some degree of a parallel in only that this place, the swamp, the institutions here, has been stuck so long, just churning the same kind of vanilla garbage that this town produces, that no one's inspired by it. We've been moving the needle, I think, with some inspirational things that people are excited about, but we got a long way to go. We talked about healthcare a minute ago. If you want to inspire people, then make healthcare affordable, right? And if you're a radical leftist, you want single payer healthcare. Well, that's going to be your motivation against the sort of swamp-driven issue, and they're going to have an argument for single payer healthcare, and I reject it because I think that's going to make healthcare much less effective for poor and hardworking middle-class Americans alike. But if you're a conservative, then you better start saying insurance companies shouldn't choose your healthcare either. And we ought to be honest about that and say a doctor and a patient are the ones that get to control their healthcare. I know that was in the weeds, but I just think it goes to the core of it.
And now Democrat Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon.
Do you have any thoughts just about where the party's headed and where the party's going today?
I do. The best politics are good policy. Just think about what we've done today. We're helping people who more than anything are hoping that a family member can get an organ and give them life. That's something that families really care about. And I think if somebody does it right and fixes it, they'll say, that's the kind of person I want, in office. Then we're talking about Mr. Epstein. And I said that I thought following the money, hell, that's how we caught Al Capone, is, with taxes, not with all these other kinds of approaches. I think the American people, and I hear it in my town hall meetings, I've had more than 1,100 open to all town hall meetings, that people want to see elected officials stand up. I do a few things that are different. For example, at those town hall meetings, I just finished 5 in areas where Donald Trump got more than 70% of the vote. So they're very red, bright red. And I talk to them, or really listen to them, talk about healthcare, because they're seeing that their rural hospitals are going to get flattened. So my counsel to everybody who's thinking about the politics of 2026 is the best thing you can do for your politics is do your job and get out and listen. Listen, listen, listen.
Is there any similarity you see, and it's fine if the answer is no, but to this movement of Republicans that is weary of the establishment that elevated toward Trump? And is there a population of Democrats weary of the establishment, or they're thinking the establishment's not doing enough, that's going, making people popular that are in the socialist or farther progressive angle?
I think independents in both parts of the spectrum are growing. I also think the sleeper area to watch is those who are moving towards the libertarian space. And you followed me in technology. I got a good stroke of DNA in my system. I was the first to come out for marriage equality back in 1995, years and years before anybody else. And I uttered one sentence: if you don't like gay marriage, don't get one. And I can walk into any part of America today and people say, that's right.
And how does that apply to what you're seeing today?
Well, I think these independents are saying, I hear all the time about, government getting off my back and getting out of my private affairs. I don't see them doing it. So again, when you put up specific approaches, and all my advisors, I had the chance to become Oregon's first Democratic person to get the win in an election in 30 years. And all my advisors said, don't do that now. It's too early. Even folks in the gay community said it's too early. And I said, I believe it. And I believe particularly if I'm saying that I've got a solution to it, I want to hear about the role of government. I said what I said with respect to gay marriage. And now I can have people applaud in the most conservative area and the most liberal area.
Last but not least, Independent Senator Angus King of Maine.
You were an independent. Is it fair to say you're more in line, if you had to pick one, you're more in line with the Democrat Party than the Republican Party?
Yes, I would be disingenuous if I didn't answer that question.
What are some of the conversations you're having with your Democrat and maybe even some of your Republican colleagues in the Senate as these things are developing and decisions are being made about what to do?
Well, I think there's a lot of concern, and a lot of the concern is sort of immediate. We don't want to lose the Department of Education, or we're worried about funding for drug treatment programs or whatever. So there's kind of that's the sort of on the ground effort. But there are people that are starting to talk about this whole larger constitutional issue, which frankly, I don't think should be partisan. What I'm giving you is a profoundly conservative position. It's going back to the original understanding and meaning of the Constitution and how it was designed. And they designed it in this herky-jerky, checks and balances for a reason, again, to protect our liberty, because that's 1,000 years of human history tells us power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now, my Republican colleagues are starting to be a little uncomfortable about this, but as I said, most of what I am hearing from them is, well, the courts will take care of us. I think that's a cop-out, frankly.
How long have you been in the Senate?
I'm starting my third term. I was elected in 2013. I was governor of Maine in the late 90s, and then I had 10 years back in the private sector. I'd had 25 years in the private sector before. I'm a kind of accidental politician. I didn't run for governor till I was 50 years old. I'd never run for anything before. Then I had 10 years where I worked in the private sector, was on boards and did some entrepreneurial work, and then was elected to the Senate in 2012.
From the 30,000-foot level view, not just as a senator, what do you think about everything that's going on with politics and the Trump presidency, the second term, and so on?
Well, I think there are developments, again, outside of Donald Trump. One of the things that I've observed since I've been here, which is 12 years, is two things. One is what I call the balkanization of the news media. Somebody said the other day, they're looking for affirmation rather than information. And people choose the news media that sort of fits where they're coming from. If you're conservative, you watch Fox News. If you're a liberal, you watch MSNBC. And the problem with that is we end up with people, our country's been divided into two separate factual universes. And in my experience in public policy, if you can agree on the facts, it's pretty easy to solve, to figure out what the solution is. If you can't agree on the facts, it's practically impossible. And we have people that are walking around, as I say, in different factual universes. That's problem one. The other problem that I observed is what I call the tyranny of the primary, where primaries came into being in the 50s and 60s as to democratize selection of candidates. The problem is the national average of turnout in a primary is about 21% of the party. Who's that 21%? In the Republican Party today, it's going to be the most passionate Trump MAGA people. In the Democratic Party, it tends to be the furthest to the left. And so you end up with people coming here with no interest whatsoever in talking to one another. And not only that, what's really dangerous, and I haven't seen it, I'm the only one, this is my idea, so who knows. But what I've seen is you can now lose your primary, not because of your position on immigration or abortion or whatever it is. You can lose your primary if you're deemed not sufficiently hostile to the other side. In other words, you're a dead duck if you're viewed as somebody who's willing to listen to the other side and try to find a compromise solution. That's dangerous if you think about it, because people come here, none of these major problems can be solved without compromise. Nobody has all the right ideas. But if you come here afraid to talk, think about what does that do to the Congress? Paralysis, can't solve problems. And that has nothing to do with Donald Trump. That's just where our politics have gone. And I think we need to be thinking about opening up primaries, letting independents vote in primaries, having systems of ranked choice voting and other open primaries. Because right now we're in a situation where it's sort of an institutional guarantee of gridlock. And I think that's a problem. It's, again, it has nothing to do with the current administration. There are problems I've outlined.
What reflections do you, as an independent, what are your thoughts on?
Well, it's not my job to tell the Democrats how to run their party.
But what are your observations? Not telling them what to do, but just what are some of your thoughts on all of that?
Well, let me back up a little. When I first came to the Senate, which is a dozen years ago, not all that long ago, just off the top of my head, there were Democratic senators from Indiana, South Dakota, North Dakota, Nebraska, West Virginia, 2 from Montana, Iowa. None of those states are very much gettable by the Democrats today. Why is that? And I think it's a failure to have paid attention to rural voters, to small town voters, and I think that it's a mistake. I mean, I think there's been a focus on sort of exotic issues from one side to the other, and I guess I'm not a profound commentator, but it's an alienation of particularly rural and small town voters. I mean, you look at the map, and Donald Trump will tell you he carried 5 times the counties that Kamala Harris, but the counties he carried were small. A lot of counties, but not population.
A lot of space, but not concentration of people.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think, and I feel very awkward because I don't feel like it's my job to advise the Democrats or anybody else for that matter. But I think a kind of return to the working class roots of the Democratic Party, common sense issues that are of concern, whether it's inflation or the concerns about immigration. I think one of the great mistakes of the Biden administration was not attending to the immigration issue when it was obvious that it was a major issue. Remember, they said Kamala Harris will be the border czar, but there was never any czarring going on. And I think that was a case where the Democrats were preoccupied with other issues and not really realizing how powerful that was and how concerning it was to people all over the country.
Sunday, May 17th, on Full Measure, The Big Picture, with more from all of these players, but I'm also going to dive into the history of socialism and communism in the United States. I think you'll find it very interesting. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast and that you'll consider sharing it with your friends, leaving me a great review, and subscribing. Don't forget my other podcast, the Sharyl Attkisson podcast. And if you would like to find some fascinating, exclusive, original gifts for people you know who are independent thinkers, while at the same time supporting independent reporting causes, you can go to SharylAttkisson.com and click the store tab for some exciting products you'll only find there. Do your own research, make up your own mind, think for yourself.